right, it's a few minutes after the hour, so I think maybe we can get started, and I'm certain that people will be trickling in as we go, which is totally fine. Anybody can jump in whenever they're ready. So this is the Climate Justice Advocacy in the Time of Coronavirus webinar. Thank you for joining us. Let's talk briefly about who this is, who's doing this work, and what it's about. So this is a screenshot from the Creation Justice website that gives the mission, the vision, and the work of this particular group. This was born out of the Creation Justice Summits Creation Care Summits that were held the previous 2 summers, one in Minnesota, one in Tennessee. And the idea was just to bring people together who are doing this work across the country. And then in Tennessee, we heard people from around the globe that are doing this kind of work and talking together and finding new ways to be in partnership with one another and this beautiful planet that we share together. So it was out of the summit that happened in Nashville last summer. There were a group of people that kind of sorted themselves into different groups to continue the work, and state level advocacy was one of those groups. And so we've been meeting regularly since last July. And we put together this webinar as a way to say, you know, let's equip folks to do some advocacy at their state level right now. As we're sheltering in place, we're home, and some of us have a little extra time. Let's put some of that to good use. So I will go to the next slide. And Mel's gonna get us, whoops. Hold on, my bad, going back. Mel is gonna get us started with a prayer, and he's gonna do some introductions. Go ahead, Mel.
Thank you, Christina. It is so good to have everybody with us this evening. Before I pray, I am going to read a brief reflection from Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov. And it says, "Love all God's creation, the whole and every grain of sand in it. Love every leaf, every ray of God's light. Love the animals, love the plants, love everything. If you love everything, you will perceive the divine mystery in things. Once you perceive it, you will begin to comprehend it better every day, and you will come at last to love the whole world with an all-embracing love." Let us pray. Help me, dear God, to see my brother with the eyes of Christ, to hear my sister with the ears of Christ, to taste my neighbor's hunger with the mouth of Christ, to smell creation's beauty with the nose of Christ, to touch the world's pain with the hands of Christ, and to love life, each life, every life, with the heart of Christ. For that is what we as disciples are called to do. Amen. Well, I'm going to introduce myself first, and then I'm going to introduce the rest of the panelists. I'm Mel Caraway. I'm a retired United Methodist pastor in the North Texas Annual Conference. I'm a Global Ministries Earthkeeper. And for the past nearly 20 years, I have been on the board of directors and served as past president of Texas Impact, which is the parent organization of Texas Interfaith Center for Public Policy and Texas Interfaith Power and Light. I do advocacy primarily in climate and creation care, and I have been an observer at COP25 last December in Madrid, along with 2 of our other panelists. Busy, busy, busy. Okay. Next panelist is Christina Kreuz. Christina, they can see what you do, and you stay busy, but as a clergy spouse, you are above all, for you put up with us. And For those who don't know, Christina is sitting amongst moving boxes because they're going to a new appointment in just a little while. So Christina, you want to tell a little bit about your work with Faith in Place, which is the Illinois affiliate of Interfaith Power and Light, and your work with UMW.
Sure. So I live currently in southernmost Illinois, which is very near to Kentucky. But we will be moving a little further north to central Illinois very shortly. But I work for the Illinois affiliate of Interfaith Power and Light as their Southern Illinois Outreach Coordinator. And I've also been working with United Methodist Women for the past few years with the North Central jurisdiction as a Be Just, Be Green or a climate justice jurisdiction guide, which means I resource United Methodist Women around basically the Midwest. And I've been asked also to chair our Church and Society committee at the conference level. So that will be starting at whenever we have our annual conference, which is in question currently as to when that's going to be. And again, I'm also a clergy spouse.
Okay, next is John Hill. And for the last 18 years, John's been at the General Board of Church and Society. I met John in his first week on the job when I was in Washington for training as Church and Society Chair for the North Texas Annual Conference. But John brings a very unique perspective. He's the Deputy General Secretary for Advocacy and Organizing, and his primary roles are with climate justice and economic justice. But John began his career in Washington as a congressional staffer, and he also has sort of been a lobbyist. So he brings a wide variety of expertise to the table tonight. John, welcome. Unmute John. Anything you want to say, John?
No, thanks, Mel. That's great. Thanks for the kind words.
Okay. Liz Lee is on staff at United Methodist Women in New York, and her portfolio includes economic and environmental justice, and she's the lead advocate on climate justice at UMW. Liz, welcome, and say hello to everyone.
Hello, it's wonderful to be with you all. And it's great to hear that you knew John 18 years ago. That's wonderful. When he was like a high schooler, you know.
Looks the same now as he did then. Okay, welcome, Liz. And finally, it's Kara Fleischer. Kara is from Tallahassee, Florida, and she is the creation care leader at her church, St. Paul's UMC, and is part of the conference task force. And the very neat thing, in addition to her longstanding advocacy, Kara is now an elected official. And her portfolio is part of the Leon County Water Board, is that correct? Is dealing with water issues. So Kara, introduce yourself and say hi to folks.
Hi, everybody. I'm thrilled to be here with you. Thank you.
And Kara, I had knew about Kara, but we met in Madrid at COP25 with John. So that was a wonderful experience. Christina, you want to give some information to people on how they can ask, well, they've got questions to answer. They've got homework, don't they?
Well, just a little. So we'd like to know where you're from. So if you can navigate to where the chat box is, it looks like a little speech bubble, and type in your name and your geographic location, wherever you might be in the United States right now, just so we can kind of say hi and see where everybody's from today. So just take a few minutes to do that. We can keep ourselves going, so you can do that at your leisure at whatever time works for you, but we would love to see where you're from, and thank you so much for joining us today. We're so glad to see the enthusiastic response to this webinar. So let's go on, and I believe Mel will be talking now.
Okay, well, we want to call your attention to a publication that General Board of Church and Society has published. It's called Creating Change Together, and it's basically an advocacy handbook, and it gives you a lot of information that you will need as you become more active as an advocate. And so we can go on to the next slide. I think that they can get that website and download from there. One of the things that we as advocates have to keep in mind, I think, is that God has worked through a variety of people throughout the ages. And many of those advocates' work is recorded in the Bible. And it goes as far back as the time of Moses, when the midwife, Shipra and Hua, basically engaged in civil disobedience to save children from Pharaoh's decree. And then Moses himself and his brother Aaron challenged the power and were able to free the Israelites. All the prophets speak publicly about the truths that the people are not paying attention to and are casting a faithful vision for their community, wherever that community might be. God also worked through Esther, a very powerful woman who used her access to power to benefit others. And that's what advocacy is all about. It's using what powers we have to benefit other people. And then, of course, there's Jesus. He used the parables as a teaching tool, but throughout his ministry, he stood with the marginalized. He directly resisted the empire of his day. He associated with people who were outcast. He was a force for advocacy in all that he did. And I think as we are called to advocacy, you know, the thing that Jesus did is he called each of us to be disciples. And part of that discipleship is our advocacy on behalf of others. I tend to call what I do green discipleship. We are called to discipleship, because God created all that we're a part of and said it was good. We are called to advocate in that way. So right now we're in the midst of a very difficult time. Things are not the way they always have been, and things are not going to go back the way they have been in the past. We're in a very changing and fluid situation, even in the midst of this pandemic. And right now we have an administration that is fully engaged in trying to roll back all of the environmental rules that exist. As I mentioned, I do a great deal of testimony. In the last couple of years, I've testified at a number of EPA hearings on methane, and the administration is trying to roll back those regulations completely. They have made it their mission to roll back 100, reverse 100 environmental rules, and they've already done 66 of those, and they're working on the remainder. As advocates, we need to speak up to our Congress people, our senators, and when we have the opportunity, appear at public hearings, write letters, do all of the things that advocates do on a daily basis to make sure that we are upholding and preserving the creation that God has allowed us to live in. As Sonia Renee Taylor has said, we will not go back to normal because normal never was. The pre-corona existence was not normal other than what we normalized, and that was greed, inequity, exhaustion, depletion, extraction of resources, disconnection, rage, hoarding, hate. We should not long to return to that pre-coronavirus environment. We are being given the opportunity to stitch a new garment, one that all of humanity and that fits all of humanity and all of nature. We have an opportunity, and that's what our advocacy is about. We put that advocacy in the context of our Christian faith. When I go to visit a congressperson or a legislator or to testify at a hearing, I always couch my testimony and my witness in terms of my faith. And when I go to visit a legislator, I research what their faith background is and look at their social principles so that I can hold them accountable to their faith. That's what we need to do.
All right, thanks, Mel, for grounding us in our sort of faith calling and reminding us of this long history of advocates who encourage us and whose tradition we can continue. We wanted to get a sense. I was scrolling through the names and the locations of the participants, and I recognized many names and saw some new ones. So we wanted to get a quick sense of how seasoned you all are in advocacy. So Christina's going to put up a couple of poll questions, and you're going to have a chance to share with us what advocacy actions you've already taken, as well as what issues you have advocated for. So you'll have a few seconds, a minute, I don't know how long, but you're invited to take that poll now. All right, and Christina, is that poll going to close on its own, or are you going to close it? Awesome. So I see a couple folks had trouble advancing or clicking. Apologies for the technology, but I am grateful that everyone who participated in the poll has taken some sort of action. That's really encouraging, and just to see the breadth of issues in which you have already engaged. Both environmental issues as well as gender, economic, healthcare, gun violence. So really heartening to see that we are among a group of seasoned advocates. So thanks for taking that poll. We did want to start today, and I know that we're, judging from the poll numbers, you all are quite experienced, but we did want to start with some sort of foundational, a common understanding and some foundational definitions of terms and ideas as we move on. So first off, when we talk about advocacy, here's sort of a classic definition that's on the screen before you about an action that speaks in favor of, that recommends, argues for a cause, supports or defends or pleads on behalf of and in solidarity with others. As Mel has spoken eloquently about, we as people of faith, particularly the Methodist movement, was founded by someone who understood that social holiness and personal holiness cannot be separated. All of our social teachings, from our Book of Discipline, the social principles, our Book of Resolutions, really remind us and call us that our faith is one that calls us to acts of personal, social, and civic righteousness, that we can't just proclaim a vision or proclaim what we believe, but we really need to live that out personally, that we live that out in community, and that we need to challenge those systems, structures, those powers that are preventing that vision from being realized. Important in this definition is really a focus on width. That's something that is certainly reflected in the mission vision for the mission, vision, and work of the United Methodist Creation Justice Movement. And that really means that our advocacy is both informed by and strengthened by the relationships we have with impacted communities, by frontline communities who are suffering disproportionately, whose voice is present but often not heard. And so how can we connect with and through those relationships improve our advocacy and solidarity with others? So I want to keep us focused on that understanding of with as we move on to a couple of other definitions. When we speak of environmental justice, and again on the screen is sort of a textbook definition of what we mean by environmental justice in the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. It was really the United Church of Christ in 1987 in their Toxic Waste and Race report that highlighted the correlation between race and the siting of toxic facilities. And we understand probably more than ever in this moment, the cost, both the human cost and the environmental toll of our system of extraction, of consumption, and of disposal, and that cost is borne by communities of color, by indigenous communities, by low-income communities. And so our vision of environmental justice, where all God's children respect and share in the goodness of creation, is really founded on an understanding that we need to be connected to in solidarity with those impacted communities and to commit ourselves to a new way of being that integrates both environmental, economic, as well as social justice. And then when we talk about climate justice, similarly, the framing is really to broaden the issue, broaden the concern to reflect that it is not simply a question of science or environmental protection, but rather that the causes and the impacts, as well as the solutions, must be understood through the experience, through the wisdom, and the leadership of frontline communities. So we know that there are some communities that are disproportionately impacted, often those that are least responsible for the climate crisis, a clear sort of textbook definition of injustice, and that we also need to integrate a holistic understanding as we aim towards solutions to the climate crisis that appreciate the aspects of human rights, of racial justice, of gender justice. So similarly, what started in many ways as a scientific question around the climate, and even today is deeply informed by our scientific recommendations, that we need to broaden our understanding and our vision to include, and our advocacy to include social, economic, and environmental justice. So in this current reality, Mel spoke about how much has changed, and we wanted to acknowledge that advocacy right now might seem a bit tricky. In some ways, I'll also offer that much hasn't changed, that the technicals of how we do advocacy are pretty consistent. So I still go up and do meetings. They just happen to be like while I'm seated here in my home, right? And so we're meeting with Hill staff, just as we always did, imparting upon them like our vision for justice. I'll say one sort of interesting opportunity is that we spend a little bit more time checking in with the staff personally. So there's sort of this pastoral moment that I think we as people of faith, as faith advocates, have an opportunity to really develop deeper relationships and understand that we're all in a dramatically different reality, both as advocates and as the staff and elected officials. And so just to sort of acknowledge that and lean into that, I think is an interesting dynamic. We also acknowledge that right now, climate is not the dominant narrative, right? That the COVID pandemic is being framed principally as a public health crisis and an economic crisis, which is true. And we all understand that there are clear environmental implications, but the current policy agenda may not reflect those. And in some of the things that we have been pushing for a long time, especially at the state level, may be pushed to the side for the moment. So the question is, as the elected officials' agendas have changed, how must our advocacy change to reflect that? To sort of frame things new into the ways that, into the current conversation. And while it may seem like we that some of the concerns have been pushed to the side. I think it is our job as advocates to continue to press those issues and to integrate them into this new conversation, given the new realities of the COVID-19 pandemic. So with that, I'm teeing it up to Liz, who's going to talk about some of the specific ways that we can continue to do advocacy while we're sheltering in place.
Thank you, John, for that really helpful framing. And I appreciated when Mel was speaking about Esther. I am based right now in New Jersey, but generally in Queens. And we are at kind of a few blocks away from Elmhurst Hospital that has been hit pretty hard by the coronavirus and deaths of my family, neighbors, et cetera. And it might seem like, well, we just have to protect ourselves, all right? We need to get as many toilet papers as we need, et cetera. But I so appreciate the passage from Esther. For such a time as this, will we rise to the occasion as God calls us to really speak truth to power and to be part of what God's call is for, this healing and restoration, not only for public health, but also of all of God's creation fully. So thank you for those passages and that encouragement in terms of our role. What can we do while sheltering in place? So we wanted to frame it in three broad buckets. One, at education, another action, and the third area of it is engagement. So when you think about education, right, one of the things that you want to do is find out what are the facts, right? And as John was talking about, how does it, in fact, impact, what are the issues, and how does it impact those around you, the health impacts, economic impacts, moral interconnections with other justice issues. And that's why when Christina was giving, and John, the advocacy experience on the poll, it wasn't purely on environmental. There was 89% of you who said you're doing that work, right? But seeing that connection, as John had said, with regards to health, which 56% said you had done, and economic justice, which 44%. So it might be in some ways flexing our muscle more, right? Learning about that. And then seeing that how deeply COVID-19 is related to all of those components, as John said, related to climate as well. And really, as we have been centering, when we're thinking about climate justice, we have to connect it to environmental justice. In the United States context, fossil fuel burning, power plants exacerbate injustice very concretely in health outcomes like asthma. Children of color are 4 times as likely to be hospitalized and 10 times more likely to die from asthma attacks. That's pretty significant if we're just pausing on those realities. Right? And we're not even talking about the other related realities of impacts on heat waves, droughts, floods that are disproportionately felt by those who are least responsible that John was speaking about. Studies have shown over the past several months and weeks that the reliance on fossil fuels has led to who is dying, right, and sick from the coronavirus. Fossil fuels used from coal power plants to transportation increase the level of fine particulate matter in the air that can severely compromise our lungs. And a recent nationwide Harvard study examining data from 3,000 counties have noted that a person living for decades in a county with higher levels of air pollution from particulate matter is 15% more likely to be killed by the coronavirus than someone with 1 unit less. And that's playing out in New York City. It's interesting, if someone lives in the Upper West Side of Manhattan, the death rates are very low. But if someone lived in my neighborhood, it's significantly higher because I live in a community that's predominantly communities of color and also low income. So the COVID-19 has direct connections with environmental racism. And the history is deep, unfortunately, that EPA has highlighted that 46 of the states in the US, communities of color are exposed to higher levels of dangerous air pollution than white communities. Right, and as John was speaking about with the UCC report, and is showing that again and again, that African Americans have 54 times higher exposure than the overall population. And you may have seen the recent report by the CDC that's noted that about 30% of confirmed cases of COVID in the US occur amongst Black people, though they are only 13% of the national population. Blacks are 33% of those hospitalized, and those patients tend to be younger overall than white patients and more likely to die from this disease. And it could be broken out in states like Illinois. Blacks are 15% of the population, but account for 25% of COVID cases. Right? So we want to know these realities of what is going on, and especially if we are saying we are doing the advocacy that God calls us to, where are we getting our information? And media is not always covering that, right? So what is our responsibility as people of faith to really lift up those facts of those who it's impacting the most? So we also want to look at what does it look like where you live. Does your state have renewable portfolio standards? Are they tied to just transition and equity as part of that? Does COVID-19 stimulus include equity and renewable energy? And so I live in New York, and we partner with New York Renews. It's a coalition of environmental groups, faith-based organization, labor, many other groups that have been pushing for Governor Cuomo, who's been doing a lot of great things, but to say that there must be equity and funding for future kind of transition to a green economy, right? Because it's going to directly reduce air pollution, which would also reduce those who it's being impacted. Is your state backing off of environmental standards or strengthening them? So these are things that you really want to be thinking about. And you also want to be thinking about the broader policy and advocacy points as well. Over 100 organizations and individuals, including green, labor, and frontline groups. You may be familiar with U.S. Climate Action Network that a number of Interfaith Power and Lights and Church and Society, UMW, is a part of. And they recently produced what's known as a document called A Vision for Equitable Climate Action. And it is a roadmap for how we can prevent the worst of global warming in ways that make communities safer, families more secure. And it's looking at everything from agriculture, energy, to transportation, to healthcare. So I think looking at those and learning about those interconnections are so incredibly important. And VICA is just one mechanism of seeing what actions that can be done as well. So we want to just emphasize three buckets within that and the actions. One is self-responsibility, right? What am I doing to address and reduce the climate crisis, even with COVID, right? Right now, I think about the essential workers in our community. Am I ordering from Amazon when I know their livelihoods and lives are being at risk, or at the dollar store where there's no security for them, or those at the slaughterhouses? Right, which is also directly connected to emissions reductions. So thinking about that, I've been fascinated by the report that came out last week that estimated that there's been a 17% reduction in global carbon dioxide emissions, primarily due to reduced driving. Right, so it can make a huge impact, but we don't want to address the climate crisis by having a shelter in place or COVID-19, right, to continue. So which means that we need more systemic issues and solutions to counter the climate crisis. And that also includes corporate responsibility and accountability. So there are many ways that we can be involved. You may be familiar with the Stop the Money Pipeline campaign that's going on, focusing on the biggest investor, which is BlackRock, the biggest insurance company, Liberty Mutual, and the biggest loaner, JP Morgan Chase, and saying that instead of supporting the fossil fuel industry and economy, redirect the funds to renewable energy. Right? And that type of work has been making advances so that BlackRock has been doing more in terms of redirecting their funding. And so we can be questioning companies' social license to operate through our advocacy. And then there's, of course, government responsibility that we want to focus and hone in on as well. Because without policies and laws, there's only so much change that can be done, right? So we want systemic transformation, moving from our fossil fuel economy for one that is regenerative and whole and filled with justice. So what does that mean for us? Our engagement means not only talking amongst ourselves, but really focusing on the decision makers, right? Who has the power And fortunately, we are in the United States where we can hold our elected officials accountable. And Mel was speaking about we need to understand, right, our elected officials before we reach out to them about the issues, their voting records, are they people of faith, what are their positions, and really do our homework in the policies that they supported, maybe other concerns that they themselves don't see that we can lift up as well. And really, as for that, really providing information for the legislators. And what else can you do? Find out what other organizations are doing. And I really wanted to encourage that we focus on those who are being most impacted, frontline communities. And as people of faith, again and again, it was very clear that God had a particular concern for the widows and the foreigners of that particular context and time. And it's not out of charity, but because that there was inherent systemic injustice. Right, and so we need to come alongside and being in solidarity with those groups and communities and organizations, and think about the particular role that we as people of faith can lead where others can't. Right, a number of you have led vigils, marches, and actions as well, and with that faith lens, being able to call and write our decision makers, to submit letters to the editors and advocate through social media. November is coming. We need to vote. If you haven't already, are not registered, especially if you moved, please register. Get others to register and to vote as well. And another core component, whatever you do in all of these engagements, right, we need to be sharing our personal story, how it's impacting us. And you may know about the public narrative framing, the me, us, how it's impacting us, and then the moment of now and the opportunity that we have. So I'm going to hand it over for you to hear about a personal story.
Well, hi, everybody. I'm Kara Fleischer, and I'm so excited to be with you tonight. I'm here to encourage you to find your own story and to share it with others. Mine is that I am a mom on a mission to protect God's earth, animals, and people. And I got there from maybe not so regular of a story, but I will share with you. I was a public relations career person in Atlanta with a new family, a new baby, and we lived in downtown, renovated our home, could walk to church. My husband had a real estate company, and all was lovely until our daughter, infant daughter, got asthma. And I learned very quickly about human-caused pollution from cars and power plants. And after a year of doing nebulizer treatments with my infant, which is holding a mask on her face while she was very unhappy, her doctor said, well, maybe you want to think about moving back to Florida to get away from all this air pollution. And that really opened my eyes to what humans are doing to our earth and our health. And we were in a place of privilege that we could do that. We picked up everything and came back to Florida, but a lot of people can't. When we got back to Florida, we got hit with 4 hurricanes in a row, and that was quite a shock. And that really helped me understand more about the connection between air pollution and climate change, and how the state that I love, I'm a native Floridian, is threatened by air pollution and what we're doing to the earth. So that motivated me to get involved. And I found a group called Citizens Climate Lobby. It's one of the largest citizen lobbying groups. And for free, I was trained on how all the climate science and how to be an advocate, how to be a lobbyist. And I became the liaison for my local office for our U.S. Representative Gwen Graham at the time. And so I started going to her office and lobbying with the people there. And then I was able to go to Washington, D.C. and meet her and go to a large lobbying event there where we met with every representative and every senator on the Hill. So that was really a great experience to lobby for a carbon fee and dividend solution to climate change, and mostly to, use my voice as a person of faith to be able to tell my story about my children and, you know, why I was so passionate about this cause. Along these lines, I was at church and I asked our pastor, Pastor Candace Brooks, what our carbon footprint was. And she said, "Oh, you mean creation care?" And I was like, "I've never heard of that." But very quickly, she taught me about the Book of Resolutions and everything that our faith stands for. And I was so excited and proud to be United Methodist, and started on our path to start a creation care group at our church. And we have just finished our 4th year, and we have a garden and do all kinds of outreach and education. And that has been such a joy. And creation care, I found my true love of where my faith and my values come together. And it fills me with so much joy to be able to spend my time trying to protect God's earth and God's people. And I think that it's one of those things that, you know, people are gravitating towards it because we are positive and we're joyful, and they just want to be a part of it. So it's been a real joy to do that. Now, you know, I could not run and hide from this path I was on. And so when I moved to Tallahassee to get away from the hurricanes that were hitting us down in Central Florida, I moved back to my hometown in Tallahassee. I had no idea the area we're moving into was going to be subjected to seasonal burning of forests, control burns, backyard burning. And so there are times of the year that our air quality was as bad, if not worse, than Atlanta. And when I tried to talk to my local officials and friends and neighbors, no one seemed to even notice or care. And when I'd go pick up my children from school, the school would be covered in smoke. I would have to make, you know, special arrangements for them not to be on the playground because of, you know, their airway sensitivities. And so I decided to run for office because I thought this was an important issue. And after living in a big city and seeing how important it was, I thought it was unacceptable that in our smaller, you know, more, we have 350,000 people living here. It was just really not okay that we were being subjected to all these particulates that were hurting, that can hurt health. And people didn't even seem to notice because we didn't have the traffic jams and the big power plants that were causing it. So I ran for office for a local county environmental position. And I ran a waste-free campaign. So I took no donations. I made no signs. I figured, you know, that'd be pretty, you know, counterintuitive to do that for an environmental position. So I just used PR, and I won. So that was very exciting. And so since then, I've been working. I go to my mayor's office and the county commissioner's office and talk to them about, you know, different programs. And I've become active with our local group who is going, you know, encouraging our city and county to go 100% renewable in a just and equitable way. And we're actually now in the stages of, we have a consultant and they're going to be working on our clean energy plan. So it's very exciting that it's moving along. And so I would really encourage you all to find your story. Everyone has one. I was a mom. I wasn't a scientist. I really didn't know how I fit into this big world of climate action and advocacy, but it turns out that people really want to hear from everyday people. And so I've been, I write for our local newspaper now, and I've spoken at climate rallies, and it's just truly a joy to be able to share, you know, this passion I have to try to make this world better and to do it as soon as we can, because we know that, you know, within the next 10 years, a lot of windows are going to be closing. So I feel a real urgency. So I've been doing this work full-time as a volunteer. And, you know, it just, you know, so I want to say that there's, the reason why we do this is because we want to build power to be able to create political will for our leaders to change. And the more people we inspire, the more they get involved, and it just cascades to we just have a movement. And that's what we really need now, is a movement for change. And there's a lot of ways you can do that. You can have a Facebook group. You can get involved with other organizations that are already doing so much of this work. I got involved with Citizens Climate Lobby and Moms Clean Air Force. United Methodist Women is doing some amazing work. There's some, statewide groups like Rethink Energy Florida, got involved with our Florida United Methodist Task Force. So there's a lot of ways to make a difference. And the biggest thing I would leave you with is to say that to pray and make it part of your spiritual life, to pray for God's earth and God's people, and to fill you with the strength and the energy to keep on going when it's hard, because this isn't easy work, but it's incredibly fulfilling work. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Kara, for that powerful message, and just thank you for your active prophetic witness as an elected official. And I'm sure some of our members at United Methodist may be reaching out to you in terms of that collaborative work as well. Some ways that you can take action. One way is through United Methodist Women, and I'm going to provide a link right now that you can sign on as well. And so it's in the chat box. We have for a number of weeks been urging Congress, we've written to the governors as well, to urge a moratorium on water, electricity, broadband, oil, utility shutoffs at home, because those who currently cannot pay for utility need water to stay clean and get coronavirus off their hands. If they are sheltering in place and need remote learning, they need to have broadband access. So, and so it's a two-part request. It would be written to your congressperson, senators, as well as your governor, if your particular state does not have a moratorium. Currently, only 20-some states have some sort of moratorium, the rest do not. And there's been recent articles, even these moratoria are being lifted, and that's causing huge problems with millions of people out of work as well. So please join us in this campaign. We also have other campaigns that you could check on at UMW, but this is one that I think really directs with our environmental justice work as well. I'm going to hand it over to John.
Thanks, Liz. Yeah, I just wanted to lift back up on our website. As Christina noted at the beginning, we have a toolkit that is a helpful resource both for seasoned advocates as well as for folks who are new into advocacy, with step-by-step guides for calling your members of Congress, writing your members of Congress, also how to formulate and share your story. So if you were inspired by Kara, how you might help develop your own story and share that story. And these are both the toolkit, and we have one-pagers that are kind of step-by-step guides. I'd also lift up that we're in the midst of a series of webinars that are happening each week on the pre-existing conditions revealed by COVID-19. Last week's was on dismantling systemic racism, and we have an action related to that. This week's around the particular vulnerabilities and concerns related to the incarcerated and detention system in our country. Future ones that you all might be particularly interested on relate to the food system, as well as rebuilding an inclusive, just economy. So look for those. The links are on our website, and our actions section will reflect each of those in the coming weeks.
All right, so it's Christina again. So through my work with Faith in Place, or Illinois Interfaith Power and Light, I help to set up and coach green teams, or you might call that a creation justice team, or you might call that a creation care team, or a stewardship team. It really just varies by your particular context, but starting a green team at your church is a really good start. It's a really good place to go, and it helps to build some power within your church. So that's a good place to start. And if you're looking for more information about that, you might search faithinplace.org, where we have various handouts and things, or you can email me at christina@faithinplace.org, and I can get you connected to those resources. You might also invite an environmental justice speaker to guest preach. It's easier than ever to get people to do that now because they don't have to travel. So you might be able to get somebody to join you during one of your perhaps virtual church services. Also, showing environmental films or having panel discussions. You know, though things are a little more challenging without being in person, these are still things that we can be doing remotely. Writing or sponsoring climate justice resolutions for your annual conference. There are various United Methodist women who have done this successfully and have maybe have templates for you. You can email me for that because I have some examples. So that might be tough this year, but that's something for you to plan ahead for next annual conference. Doing a book study. Virtual book study or maybe in-person book study eventually. United Methodist Women has a climate justice study that was used through Mission U several years back. That's a really good study and a good place to start. But any of the panelists, I'm sure, could recommend resources there or book studies. Invite your pastor to preach a green sermon during the season of creation, which is through the months of September to October, or Earth Day, which of course is behind us, but comes around every year. So do a little bit of that planning ahead of time, get on the schedule, and make that be part of your year. You can attend a state environmental lobby day. Again, it's probably not happening in person this year, but it may be happening as veto sessions may start occurring maybe later in the fall. That may be something that you can do. Or there may be virtual ways that you can check in with your representatives. Letter writing is always a good thing to do, and that's something we can do from the comfort of our home. Become an Earth Keeper. Global Ministries is a wonderful program called Earth Keepers. Mel is an Earth Keeper. Kara is an Earth Keeper. I'm sure several of our participants tonight are Earth Keepers. It's a great program to help you, again, become a leader in your community and then go out and build some power within your house of worship and your greater community. So we did fantastic on time. I am so pleased. But that gives us a few minutes to have questions, should you have any. So I will be monitoring the chat box. But I did want to say before we stop that these slides and this recorded webinar will be linked to the UMC Creation Justice website very soon. I will work on that to get up as quickly as possible, but you can go to umcreationjustice, all one word, .org to find those resources. There will also be a follow-up email hitting your email boxes sometime tomorrow with that link to that website, as well as some other resources that you might find helpful. So if you can't remember, you'll be getting a reminder in your email box. So check the account that you signed up for this event with, and you'll find those resources there. I'm also, while I'm waiting for questions to come in, I'm going to put up email addresses for the panelists. So should you want to connect with any of us, here is how you could do that.
Christina,
so let me pull up. Yeah.
Let me just summarize a couple of things. One of the things that both Liz and John especially made clear is that we cannot isolate climate justice from the conversation surrounding the coronavirus pandemic. We can't separate it from health justice, economic justice. They are all interrelated. And our advocacy takes place on the federal level, on the state level, but also on the local level. And we can't neglect any of those. So just wanted to emphasize those points that have already been made, but very important, I think. And also, we will have a list of when state legislatures meet and when advocacy days are scheduled. We're working to put that together as well.
I'm not seeing any questions, so it would be a shame to not thank all of our panelists today, Kara and John and Liz and Mel, for giving of their time and lots of effort and communication and coordination to put this together. I think it's just such a valuable resource. And I don't know about you, but it helps me to feel less alone, and it helps me to feel less helpless right now when I'm, sheltering in place is an act of love for my community. This helps me find other ways to keep doing that, even while I'm in my home. So thank you to everyone who participated.
There were a couple of questions in the chat box, and one is, when is the next Earthkeeper training? And Jenny Phillips jumped in and said they're going to be doing some stuff virtually online, but they don't have a current one. And the other one was, let's see, find that real quickly. Would anybody like to speak to the current prospects for green elements in the next stimulus bill? John?
Thanks, Mel. I think that was Paul that asked that question. So right now, the focus of all of our attention is on the Senate. The House passed a bill that did not, so the House passed a bill with a lot of things in it, many of which are unlikely to be considered in the Senate. But now our hope is that there will be another relief measure for sure. That feels pretty certain. The elements of that are very much open for debate. So if we would like to see particular elements supporting certain aspects of the economy or not funding certain aspects of the economy, we need to make sure that that's impressed upon senators at this moment, as well as reinforced on the House side, because eventually the House will have to vote on it again. So this, I don't have a crystal ball. If I did, we could all be a lot more successful here. I think that what we need to focus on is making sure that our message, our vision is made clear to the Senate in this moment, and then to reinforce that with the House side in the coming month.
And Beth Bond said, is there anything it said, we're geographically diverse. How do we make an impact collectively when none of us has real influence? We all have real influence because we go to the ballot box. But how do we collectively make our voice heard? We're going to be doing follow-up, and we're going to be continuing to provide resources to you. And also, hopefully we'll be able to get some organization done in some geographical pockets. And I think that's pretty much it on the chat box, Christina.
All right. Beth, I see your question about if there's anything we can do besides a change of the current administration to stop all the EPA reversals. Same deal with, contacting legislators. When there are hearings, show up. When they're accepting comment, submit it. It does matter. They log it, they take care of it.
I think continuing to speak to our legislators, no matter what party they're in, and in emphasizing the importance to them that climate justice needs to be taken into account across the board, because it's all interwoven with economic justice, health justice, and everything. So we can't isolate climate justice and expect to get anything done. It has to be done in concert with other areas.
If I could just add something too. I know that we were in a meeting with some representatives and senators at COP25, and they said that they just weren't hearing enough from the faith community
Correct.
about climate action. And although I know a lot of work is being done, I think we could still organize ourselves in a way to get more attention. So just a couple of ideas. Our church was just about to start doing a letter writing moment after services on Sunday. That's something we found out that they used to do, and we were about to bring that back. So now we need to get that going virtually or from our different locations. Also, to have in your phones the numbers to all of your representatives. local, state, and federal, and literally try to call them every week. When I was lobbying, the staff told me that if they get over 5 phone calls about an issue, it raises their eyebrows a little bit. And they take all of that information and tell it to the member every day. So you can believe that there's a lot of other people calling about a lot of other issues. And, you know, it seems like we sometimes can feel like this is such a big issue. It's so overwhelming. We're just one person. How can we make a difference? But I can tell you that my eco anxiety goes down every time I make a phone call or send an email. And I really do think if we could get all of us on the same time and the same page and the same message, and that a lot of that is probably already going on, but maybe we could do even more. We could change that feeling that they have, that it came out of like Nancy Pelosi's mouth, that they're just not hearing enough from the community of faith.
John, you want to somebody about interfaith alliances, and you want to speak a little bit since you're engaged with a number of those.
I mean, I think the
ecumenical partnerships.
Yeah, the short message is that we're stronger together, that if we have, we connect ecumenically, interfaith with secular partners, maintaining our unique voice and identity is important, but joining that with others certainly strengthens our message. And I'm reading in the chat some ideas, again, questions about how to have greater impact. Totally affirm Kara's message about it's only a small number can have an impact. So if your green team at your church decide that you're all going to call in one day, you can help magnify that impact. When I worked in a congressional office, it made a big difference if we heard one call, once a week from everyone as opposed to all on one day. An example of when we were working to maintain health access back in 2017, rather than having faith folks call at different times, we sort of had one faith call-in day and actually helped shut down the switchboards at the U.S. Capitol, and that gets their attention. So thinking about ways that just to do what we're doing, but do it more efficiently, more effectively by magnifying that impact and connecting with others.
And I would say, just building on that, I love Beth, saying one letter. I think that would be very powerful. United Methodist at the federal level coming together, but also at the state level, right? And so if we work interfaith, if we work ecumenically, and it's the Presbyterians, the Lutherans, the Methodists coming together, I think would be very, very powerful. And I think we need to be thinking about like new alliances and opportunities as well, right? So maybe it's not the faith groups we're always reaching out to. It might be the health groups, right? It might be other groups that we could make those relationships with and strengthen as well. And I know that's something that we've been doing at United Methodist Women. And I wanted to lift up the Poor People's Campaign because they are making those connections, making it very intersectional. And I think that gives us space to explore and also be in a place of learning because it is prioritizing those who are most vulnerable in our country as well.
All right, everybody. Well, we have gone a few minutes over. I am so thankful that you stayed to hear the answers to questions. Again, you will get a follow-up email with links to find where the slides and the video that we've recorded here of this. Thank you so much for your participation. Thank you for your care for creation, wherever you may be, and keep up the good work. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.